On a recent trip to Germany, we had the opportunity of visiting 3 cities that once were part of the Eastern Bloc of the country, or in other words, part of the communist regime. Today, I was surprised to find that cities such as Berlin, Dresden, and Leipzig are in spots ultra-modern, densely populated, and have excellent public infrastructure and transit systems.
I don't know about you, but this is not the Germany that I think of whenever the country's name is brought up. Anytime I thought about Germany in the past, I would think of this. Lederhosen-clad men, polka music, and beer. Or I would think about cows with bells and rolling hills. I suppose this perspective was developed having grown up in a German community whose claim to fame is boasting they have the second biggest Oktoberfest in the world. Now, when I think specifically about Berlin, I think of leather-clad people gathered together in a dance bar, listening to heavily laden synth music. What I experienced, however, was neither. We were in East Germany, where traces of the communist era can still be seen by even the most undiscerning eye. Cities that were flattened during the Second World War, only to be put back together piece by piece from the piles of rubble that were left. Infrastructures of public transit that are far-reaching and hyper-efficient. No, where we visited, we neither experienced the Bavarian festivities or the underground nightclubs I had envisioned. On the surface, and at first blush, Berlin seems, well, dirty. Just about any open facade in the city has fallen prey to the taggers, otherwise known as the graffiti artist. The word artist may not be applicable in every case of tagging in Berlin, but there are certainly enough fantastic pieces that artist could be an apt way to describe these creators. Then there are those pesky scooters that litter the sidewalks and boulevards like many major cities across the world, Berlin being no exception. There are already enough distractions as a pedestrian, having to navigate trams, bikers, cars, and even uneven cobblestones, without having to additionally contend with scooters on top of that. However, once one has gotten used to the superficial first impressions of Berlin, the uniqueness of the city begins to come into focus. There is no standard of style in the city, as is often the case with other metropolitan European cities. No, in Berlin, the odder the style, the more normal it seems. It is said that Berliners are rebellious by nature, which can easily be explained by the history of the wall that separated the city. In the heart of Germany's capital city, the Berlin Wall Memorial is the central memorial site recalling German division. Located at an area fraught with history on Bernauer Straße, it extends along 1.4 kilometers of the former border strip, the only section of the Berlin Wall to be preserved in its full depth, allowing visitors to see the various elements of the border strip as it looked at the end of the 1980s. The skyline of Berlin features the iconic Berlin TV Tower, this city's version of the Eiffel or CN Tower, and looking rather awkward against the low-rise background that highlights the rest of the Berlin skyline. It would be obvious to say that some of the best views of the city can be seen from the revolving restaurant or the viewing deck of the tower. However, there may in fact be an even better spot to take in the city views. Welcome to Teufelsberg, literally translated meaning Devil's Mountain, a hill reaching 120 meters above sea level, made from an estimated 12 million cubic meters of war rubble, or apparently about 400,000 bombed-out houses, all pushed together in the north of the Grunewald Forest in West Berlin. Perched atop this man-made mound now sits the old abandoned listening or intelligence gathering station used during the Cold War by the Americans and British to learn what was going on in the Russian-controlled East Germany. The abandoned station has now become a popular destination to watch the sunset over Berlin. The remnants of the golf ball-like antennas still exist, with much of the fabric now torn away from their metal frames. The entry fee pales in comparison to the cost of getting to the top of the Berlin TV tower. However, there is no elevator to get to the roof of the abandoned building. The climb is approximately 5 stories, and for those that have mobility or height issues, this may not be the right location for you. I myself am afraid of heights, but this seemed to be abated to some extent, stopping at each story to explore the abundant and uber-talented graffiti that adorns the walls and floors, and just about any other open area that can absorb spray paint. When you finally reach the roof, you will see many others lounging about, listening to music, noshing on snacks, and sipping on beer and wine that, like us, they very wisely brought with them. Besides the views and the graffiti, the one thing that really stands out is how far away from the city this location is. There is, however, the ability to drive to the entrance. There's public transportation that stops nearby, or as we experienced ourselves, there is even Uber. The area closes just after sunset, and the organizers are sure to shuffle everyone out before the doors are closed and locked. Sure, the Berlin TV antenna has a lot more fame, but for a fraction of the cost, and with just a little effort, Teufelsberg was unquestionably far more unique and a vibe that the antenna couldn't come anywhere close to replicating. A question that I've been asked many times, and one that we considered ourselves before visiting Berlin, was regarding the food. Again, having grown up in a German community, we were accustomed to the schnitzel, sausages, and sauerkraut, and even the more obscure rolled ribs and pigtails. We were, however, surprised to find that Asian food seemed to outnumber every other restaurant, including traditional German eateries. The proliferation of Asian food, and more specifically Vietnamese cuisine, had to have some sort of explanation behind it. In posing this question, I was advised that in the early 1970s, Vietnamese were invited to come to what was then East Germany as temporary contract workers through an agreement between the German Democratic Republic and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. About 60,000 people came to do the jobs the East Germans didn't care to do themselves. When the wall came down in 1989, several Vietnamese who had already created a life, and even other generations, stayed, making Vietnamese food a common staple throughout Berlin and other parts of the former East Germany. The Germans have done a fantastic job of preserving history, and this is evidenced by the 170 plus museums that can be found throughout the city. Embedded in the middle of Berlin is Museum Island that hosts 5 museums alone. If you are a museum buff, then Berlin is the place for you. I, however, am not a fan of museums, and much preferred the river tour of Berlin, enjoying the unique and beautiful architecture of several of the famous buildings that make up the core of Berlin. Tours can range from an hour to as long as 2 hours, but I felt the hour tour was just enough time to give a taste of what makes the world-class city just that, world-class. An absolute must-see when in Berlin is the dome at the German Reichstag. The Reichstag was originally opened in 1894 and housed the Diet until 1933, when it was set on fire. In World War II, during the Battle of Berlin, the building was severely damaged by the Soviet Red Army. No attempt at full restoration was made until after German reunification on October 3, 1990. After its completion in 1999, it once again became the meeting place of the German parliament. The Reichstag Dome is a large glass dome with a 360-degree view of the surrounding Berlin cityscape. A mirrored cone in the center of the dome directs sunlight into the building so that visitors can see the working of the chamber. The dome is open to the public and can be reached by climbing 2 steel spiraling ramps reminiscent of a double helix. In allowing daylight to shine through the mirrored cone, the use of artificial lighting is significantly reduced, and thus, so are carbon emissions. The futuristic and transparent design of the Reichstag Dome is intended to symbolize Berlin's attempt to move away from a past of Nazism and instead towards a future with a heavier emphasis on a united, democratic Germany. Specifically, it symbolizes that the people are above the government, as was not the case during Nazism. Advanced registration is required in order to visit the German Bundestag and its 360-degree rooftop glass dome.